Welcome to Creepy Whispers. I'm Jack Thompson, and here we'll explore stories that will send chills down your spine. Get ready to dive into the unknown, where each whisper hides a secret. Man, I don't even know where to start. It's been a few months since this happened, but I still can't stop thinking about it. I was part of a team of archaeologists at Machu Picchu, We were super excited because we had found a secret chamber under the Temple of the Sun. It was the kind of discovery every archaeologist dreams of, But dude, if I had known what was going to happen next, I swear I would have bailed right then and there. At first, everything was calm. We were excavating, cataloging, doing our usual work. But then, out of nowhere, I started hearing these strange noises. It was like a whisper, really soft. Initially, I thought it was just the wind passing through the stones, normal, right? But as the days went by, these whispers started getting louder, more insistent. It was as if the stones themselves were trying to talk to us. I know it sounds crazy, but I swear I'm not making this up. Everyone on the team started to notice it too, and we kept looking at each other, not really knowing what to do. Things started to get really scary when Carlos, one of our assistants, disappeared. We searched for him all day, thinking he had gotten lost in some tunnel, But when we finally found him, man, it was horrible. His body was all contorted, in a bizarre position, just like the stone statues on the chamber walls. It looked like someone had bent him, as if he were made of rubber. I've never seen anything like it in my life. We were in shock, not knowing what to do. We called the authorities, of course, but we were in the middle of nowhere, and help would take a while to arrive. In the following days, the situation only got worse. The whispers kept getting louder, and we started to realize it wasn't random. There was a pattern, like it was a language. It was Mariana, our linguist, who first recognized it. It was Quechua, the language of the Incas. But we couldn't understand what they were saying. It was like it was an ancient dialect or something. And the worst part is that more people started to disappear. First, it was Roberto, then Luisa. When we found them, they were always in the same situation as Carlos, all twisted up mimicking the sculptures. It was as if the stones were, I don't know, sucking them in somehow. We were terrified, man. Nobody could sleep properly. Everyone was looking over their shoulder all the time. We tried to leave, but it was like the place wouldn't let us. Whenever we get close to the chamber's exit, the whispers would get so loud it gave us headaches, and we'd end up going back. It was like some force was keeping us there. The worst part was that we knew it was only a matter of time before it happened again. Who would be next? We started to get paranoid, distrusting each other, thinking that someone on the team might be behind all this. That's when Mariana had the crazy idea of trying to communicate with whatever that thing was. She started speaking in Quechua, using what she knew of the modern language. At first, nothing happened. But after a while, the whispers seemed to respond. Man, it was the creepiest thing I've ever seen in my life. The stones started to vibrate, and you could see waves moving on their surface. Mariana went pale and started shaking. She said she could understand some words, something about an ancestral sacrifice and a portal to the gods, but before she could explain more, she just vanished. In the blink of an eye, and we heard a muffled scream coming from inside the walls. Dude, after Mariana disappeared, it was like hell had broken loose in that chamber. The whispers turned into screams, echoing everywhere. The walls started to move, as if they were breathing. We were in total panic. Jorge, our team leader, tried to keep calm, but you could see he was as terrified as the rest of us. He started shouting orders, telling us to stick together and try to get out of there any way we could. But when we approached the exit, it was like the mountain itself was trying to swallow us. The stones started to fuse, closing the passage. We tried to dig, used tools to open a path, but it was useless. The more we tried, the faster the stones moved. That's when Jorge completely lost it. He started yelling at the walls, cursing in Portuguese and Spanish, saying we weren't going to be sacrificed to any Inca god. Man, I'll never forget what happened next. The stones. They just opened up like a giant mouth and swallowed Jorge whole. 1 second he was there, the next he was gone, and the wall went back to normal as if nothing had happened. We were paralyzed, staring at where Jorge had been, unable to believe what we had just seen. At that moment, I felt like I was going to lose my mind. We were trapped in a chamber that seemed alive, with people disappearing one by one, and no idea what to do. Panic took over everyone. Patricia, our geologist, started crying hysterically, while Philippe, the conservation guy, kept repeating that it was all a nightmare and that we were going to wake up. I tried to cling to some logic, you know. I thought maybe it was some kind of collective hallucination, toxic gases from the cave or something. But deep down, I knew it wasn't any of that. It was too real, too scary. That's when I had a crazy idea. If all this had to do with sacrifices to the Inca gods, maybe we could negotiate, you know. I started speaking out loud, mixing the little I knew of Quechua with Spanish and Portuguese. I said that we respected the gods, that we didn't want to profane their sacred place. I promised that if they let us go, we'd leave and never come back. At first, nothing happened. But after a while, the whispers seemed to change in tone. They got calmer, I think. The walls stopped moving. For a moment, I thought it had worked. But then, man, something happened that I'll never forget. The walls started to glow, like emit a strange light, kind of greenish. And in the middle of this light, faces started to appear. No, they weren't normal faces. They were the faces of our colleagues who had disappeared. Carlos, Luisa, Roberto, Mariana, Jorge. All of them. But they didn't look scared or in pain. They were smiling, man. A serene smile, almost happy. And their eyes. Man, their eyes were shining as if they had stars inside them. They started talking, all at the same time, in a mixture of Portuguese and ancient Quechua. They talked about how they had transcended, how they were now part of something bigger. They said that the Inca gods had chosen us for a special mission, that we were going to be the guardians of the portal between worlds. Man, I was completely dumbfounded. Part of me wanted to believe it, you know? Wanted to think it wasn't something bad, that our friends were okay. But another part was screaming to run away as fast as possible. I didn't know what to do, and by the look on the others' faces, neither did they. At that moment, something inside me snapped. I can't explain it, but suddenly I felt an overwhelming urge to get out of there. It was like a voice in my head was screaming now, without thinking twice. I grabbed Patricia and Philippe's arms and started running towards the exit. The faces on the walls started screaming, the whispers turned into a deafening roar, and the stones started moving again, trying to trap us. But this time, it was different. It was as if some force was pushing us out. We managed to get out of the chamber by a hair's breadth, the stones closing right behind us. We ran like crazy through the tunnels of Machu Picchu, stumbling and falling, but never stopping. When we finally reached the surface, the sun was rising. We collapsed on the ground, panting and shaking. I looked at the others and saw the same shock and disbelief in their eyes. Nobody said anything for a long time. When the authorities arrived, we tried to explain what had happened, but nobody believed us. The entrance to the chamber had completely disappeared, as if it had never existed. To this day, man, I can't explain what happened down there. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night thinking I hear those whispers. And whenever I see a stone wall, I can't help but think, what if there's something in there waiting? You know, those moments that change your life forever? Well, that's exactly what happened to me at Machu Picchu. My name is Sarah, and to this day, I can't stop thinking about what I experienced there. It happened a few months ago, during my solo trip to Peru. I've always been passionate about mountaineering and historical places, so Machu Picchu was my dream destination. I arrived there late one afternoon after completing the Inca Trail. The place is simply breathtaking. I was hypnotized looking at those ancient constructions, imagining what life must have been like there centuries ago. As I watched the sunset, I had a crazy idea. What if I hid and spent the night there? I know it's forbidden, but the idea of seeing Machu Picchu under moonlight was irresistible. I waited for the tourist movement to decrease and the guards to start emptying the place. My heart was racing. I hid behind some ruins a bit far off, praying not to get caught. When night fell completely, I came out of my hiding place. Wow, what a sight! The full moon illuminated the ancient stones in an almost magical way. The silence was total. You could only hear the wind in the mountains. I started walking slowly between the constructions, feeling as if I had gone back in time. That's when it happened. Out of nowhere, I saw a tall figure moving among the shadows. My first thought was, damn, it's a guard. I quickly hid behind a stone wall, my heart almost jumping out of my mouth. I kept peeking, expecting to see someone in uniform, but it was nothing like that. The figure I saw was different. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I noticed it was dressed in clothes that seemed to have come out of a history book. It wore a long tunic, ornamented with geometric symbols, and had a kind of headdress on its head. My first instinct was to laugh. I thought it might be an actor, doing some historical reenactment or something. But something in the way it moved, silent and fluid, gave me chills. Curious, I decided to follow it. I know it sounds crazy, but at that moment, my fascination overcame my fear. The figure moved with purpose, as if it knew every stone of the place. It led me through paths I didn't even know existed, passing through narrow openings and descending steep stairs that seemed to disappear into darkness. The deeper we went, the stranger it got. The air became heavy, with an acrid smell that reminded me of incense and something else I couldn't identify. After what seemed like an eternity, we arrived at a chamber that I'm sure no tourist has ever seen. It was a circular space, with walls covered in intricate carvings. In the center, there was a kind of stone altar. Moonlight entered through an opening in the ceiling, illuminating the scene in a surreal way. That's when I noticed the bones. Scattered on the floor and piled in corners were human remains that seemed centuries old. My heart raced. This wasn't in any tourist guide. No archaeologist had ever mentioned anything like this. I was looking at evidence of ritual sacrifices that the official history of Machu Picchu had never recorded. The figure turned to me, and I swear I could see its eyes glowing in the dark. At that moment, I understood it wasn't an actor, nor a guard, nor anything I could explain. It was something ancient. And I realized, with growing horror, that perhaps I had been lured there for a reason. Panic took over me. I turned to run, but in the shadows of the chamber, I completely lost my sense of direction. Every passage looked identical. Every turn led me back to the same place. And all the time, I could feel that presence following me, approaching. The stone labyrinth seemed endless, and I was running out of breath and hope. That's when I noticed a different light. The sky was beginning to clear. Dawn was coming. I don't know if it was luck or if some greater force was helping me, but suddenly I found an exit. I ran like never before in my life, climbing stairs and passing through openings, until I finally emerged in the main part of the ruins. When I finally reached the main part of the ruins, the sun was beginning to rise on the horizon. My whole body was shaking, and I could barely breathe. I looked back, half expecting to see that figure chasing me, but there was nothing but the ancient stone constructions, silent as they had always been. I sat on one of the terraces, trying to calm my breathing and organize my thoughts. What the hell had happened? Had I imagined it all? But no, the dirt stains on my clothes and the scratches on my arms were very real. And that chamber, those bones. I knew I had seen something I shouldn't have. As the sun rose and the first tourists and staff began to arrive, I blended into the crowd, trying to look as normal as possible. I spent the rest of the day in Machu Picchu, but this time as a regular tourist. I took photos, listened to the guide's explanations. Everything seemed so normal. Nobody talked about secret chambers or ancient rituals. It was as if that other world I had glimpsed simply didn't exist in daylight. That night, back at my hostel in Aguas Calientes, I couldn't sleep. I spent hours researching on the internet, looking for any mention of sacrifice rituals in Machu Picchu, any legend about nocturnal guardians. I found some horror stories for tourists, but nothing that compared to what I had experienced. In the days that followed, I was torn between telling someone what had happened or keeping it all a secret. Who would believe me? And if they did believe, what would happen to Machu Picchu? Would it be closed for investigation? Or worse, what if that thing I saw came after me? Unable to leave the region, I decided to stay in Cusco for a few more days. Something held me there, a mixture of fascination and fear. I spent hours in the local library, researching everything I could about Inca history and the mysteries of Machu Picchu. One afternoon, while leafing through an old book about local legends, I found a passage that made my heart race. It spoke of an eternal guardian, a spirit that protected the darkest secrets of the Incas. The description was frighteningly similar to the figure I had seen. Driven by this discovery, I decided I needed to return to Machu Picchu. Not to spend the night, of course, I had learned that lesson the hard way, but to observe, to try to better understand what had happened. The next day, I returned to the ruins. This time, I walked among the other visitors, but my eyes were attentive to every detail, every shadow. I observed the tour guides, trying to catch any mention of legends or unofficial stories. That's when I noticed something strange. One of the guides, an older man with striking indigenous features, seemed to be watching me. Several times, I caught his gaze fixed on me, with an expression I couldn't decipher. At the end of the day, as the tourists began to disperse, the guide approached me. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked in a low voice. I didn't need to ask who he was referring to. He took me to an isolated corner of the ruins and told me he was a descendant of a lineage of human guardians, charged with protecting the secrets of Machu Picchu. "What you saw," he explained, "was the eternal guardian. It only reveals itself to those who have a purpose here." I spent the following hours listening to stories I never imagined existed. The guide, whose name was Alejandro, told me about ancient rituals, secret chambers, and the true history of Machu Picchu, a history much more complex and mystical than any book had ever told. At the end of our conversation, Alejandro handed me a small stone amulet. "This will protect you," he said. "But remember, with knowledge comes responsibility. The secrets of Machu Picchu must remain safe." I left Peru a few days later, my mind full of new questions and a deeper understanding of the mysteries that surround us. Machu Picchu was no longer just an archaeological site for me. It was a portal to a world of ancient secrets. I returned to the United States transformed. My experience with the eternal guardian of Machu Picchu forever changed my view of the world. Now, whenever I hear stories about ancient and mysterious places, I wonder what other guardians are out there, protecting secrets that defy our understanding of reality. This is the story of my encounter with the eternal guardian of Machu Picchu, a story that, I'm sure, will continue to haunt and fascinate me for the rest of my life. Hello everyone, I need to share something incredible that happened to Olivia and me during our trip to Machu Picchu last week. I'm still trying to process it all. It was our wedding anniversary, and we decided to fulfill our dream of visiting the Inca ruins. We woke up early, had breakfast at our hotel in Aguas Calientes, and took the bus up to the archaeological site. The anticipation was enormous. When we arrived, the place was full of tourists as expected. We began our exploration, marveling at the architecture and history of the place. I was telling Olivia some facts I had read about the Incas when I noticed something strange. Suddenly, I realized I couldn't hear the voices of other tourists. I looked around and saw that we were alone in the area where we were standing. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence that the groups had moved to other parts of the site. We continued walking, and the feeling of isolation only grew. We didn't see any other visitors, no guides. Even the llamas that usually roam the site were gone. The silence was surreal, broken only by the sound of the wind. Olivia squeezed my hand, her expression a mixture of confusion and concern. "Luke, where is everyone?" she whispered. I tried to stay calm, but my heart was racing. We decided to go back to the main entrance, thinking that maybe there had been an emergency evacuation that we hadn't noticed. On the way back, the landscape seemed different. The stones looked newer, the vegetation denser. It was as if the place had been restored somehow. We reached the main area, and there was no one. No tourists, no staff. The ticket checkpoint was empty. Our cell phones had no signal. Panic began to set in. What was happening? Had we gotten lost somehow? It was getting late, and the idea of being stuck there overnight was frightening. We decided to follow the trail back to Aguas Calientes. The descent was tense, with every sound from the forest putting us on alert. Finally, after what seemed like hours, we saw the lights of the town. To our relief, Aguas Calientes was normal, full of tourists and locals. When we told our experience at the hotel, the manager was perplexed. According to him, there had been no evacuation or incident at Machu Picchu that day. To this day, we can't explain what happened. Maybe it was a strange atmospheric phenomenon, or maybe we got lost in a way we can't understand. Whatever it was an experience we'll never forget. In the days following our strange experience at Machu Picchu, Olivia and I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. We decided to stay a few more days in Cusco, partly to try to understand what had happened. At breakfast in the hotel, we met a couple of Canadian archaeologists, the Thompsons, who are doing research in the region. When we mentioned our experience, they were intrigued. "You know," said Dr. Thompson, "there are reports of silence zones in some archaeological sites around the world. Areas where, for unknown reasons, people experience a sense of isolation and temporal disorientation." Her husband added, "It could be related to the unique geology of the place, or perhaps some kind of electromagnetic phenomenon that affects our perception." This conversation gave us a lot to think about. The next day, we decided to return to Machu Picchu. This time, we hired an experienced local guide named Carlos. During the climb, we told Carlos our story. He listened attentively and then shared something interesting. There are local legends about hidden times in Machu Picchu, moments when the veil between past and present becomes thinner. But they're just legends, of course. When we reached the top, everything seemed normal. Tourists everywhere, guides explaining the history of the site. Carlos took us along the same path we had walked days before. Arriving at the area where we had our strange experience, Carlos pointed to some markings on the stones. These are Inca astronomical markers. They believed that certain alignments could create portals in time. Olivia and I exchanged glances. It was an interesting coincidence, but it still didn't fully explain our experience. We spent the rest of the day exploring the site, this time without incident. However, we couldn't help but feel a certain energy in the air, as if the place held secrets we didn't yet understand. Back in Cusco, we decided to visit the local museum to learn more about Inca history and myths. As we examined the artifacts, we couldn't help but wonder, what if there was some truth to these ancient beliefs? On our last night in Cusco, sitting in the main square, Olivia held my hand. "You know, Luke," she said, "we may never know exactly what happened that day, but it was an experience that connected us in a unique way with this place and its history." I nodded, understanding what she meant. Our anniversary trip had turned into something much deeper than we could have imagined. We returned home with more questions than answers, but also with a new appreciation for the mystery and magic that still exist in the world. Machu Picchu will always hold a special place in our memories. In the months following our return home, Olivia and I couldn't stop thinking about our experience at Machu Picchu. We started researching more about unexplained phenomena at historical sites, and even got in touch with some study groups on the subject. One day, we received an unexpected email from Carlos, our guide in Cusco. He informed us that a team of researchers was investigating reports of unusual experiences at Machu Picchu and wanted to interview people who had gone through something similar to what we experienced. After much discussion, Olivia and I decided to share our story with the researchers. We had a long video call with an anthropologist and a physicist who were part of the team. They asked us many detailed questions about our experience, the weather that day, our physical and mental condition, and even about our diet in the weeks leading up to the trip. Although they couldn't offer a definitive explanation, they suggested some interesting theories. One involved the possibility of temporary changes in perception due to a combination of altitude, the area's unique electromagnetic field, and the psychological state induced by the site's historical atmosphere. This conversation helped us process what happened better. We realized that, regardless of the scientific explanation, our experience had been deeply meaningful for us as a couple. Inspired by all this, Olivia and I decided to plan more trips to historical sites around the world. Not necessarily in search of more inexplicable experiences, but with a new appreciation for the history and mystery that certain places carry. Our adventure in Machu Picchu taught us to be more open to the unknown and to value shared experiences, no matter how strange they may seem. It transformed what should have been just an anniversary trip into a turning point in our lives. Today, we look back with a mixture of admiration and curiosity. We may never know exactly what happened that day at Machu Picchu, but the experience left us with an incredible story to tell and an even stronger bond as a couple. If there's a lesson we've learned, it's that sometimes the most inexplicable moments in life can be the most transformative. Our time travel in Machu Picchu may have lasted only a few hours, but its impact will stay with us forever. Has anyone else had a similar experience at a historical site? Or do you have any theories about what might have happened to us at Machu Picchu? I'm really curious to hear other perspectives on this.